The train's whistle pierced the Nevada air like a desperate cry, and Josephine Vance clutched her dead sister's shawl tighter around her shoulders as the conductor called out her stop. Skidoo, California, a mining town perched precariously on the edge of the Panamint Mountains in this year of our Lord, 1908. She stepped onto the wooden platform with trembling legs, her worn boots clicking against the planks as dust swirled around her ankles. The shawl was all she had left of Margaret, who had been meant to make this journey, who had arranged through letters to marry a rancher named Lucas Grant. Margaret, who had died 3 weeks ago from influenza, leaving Josephine alone in New York with nothing but debts and the tickets already purchased for a new life out west. Josephine had made a choice that still terrified her. She had written to Lucas Grant, explaining the situation in careful, honest words, asking if he might still honor the arrangement with her instead. His telegram back had been brief. "Come anyway. We will sort it out." Now, standing in the blazing afternoon sun with miners and rough men staring at her from every direction, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Skidoo was not what she had imagined. The town sprawled across the mountainside in a haphazard collection of wooden buildings, tents, and mining equipment. She could hear the constant thump of stamp mills crushing ore, the shouts of workers, and somewhere in the distance, gunfire that made her flinch. "Miss Vance." A deep voice cut through her anxiety. She turned and felt her breath catch. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. He wore typical cowboy attire: dusty denim trousers, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his face that struck her, strong-featured and honest, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, close enough to her own 23 years. "Mr. Grant," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas," he said, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. "Just Lucas. I am sorry for your loss." Margaret wrote often about her sister. She was fond of you. The kindness in his words nearly undid her. Josephine blinked back tears, fingers tightening on the shawl. "Thank you. I should explain more fully in person what happened, what I am proposing." "Your letter was clear enough," Lucas said. He gestured to a wagon nearby. "Let me get your trunk, then we will head to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride from here." "I thought you were a rancher nearby," Josephine said, confused, "but this is a mining town. My ranch is in Death Valley on the northern edge near the mountains. Skidoo is the closest town with a train station. It is a rough place, but my land is different. You will see." As Lucas loaded her single trunk into the wagon with ease, Josephine studied him. He moved with the confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was a gentleness in how he handled her belongings. When he offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat, his palm was calloused but warm. They rode in silence for the first several minutes, the wagon rolling down the dusty road away from the noise of Skidoo. The landscape was stark and beautiful in a way Josephine had never experienced. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their faces painted in shades of ochre and burnt sienna. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, so blue it hurt to look at. "I need you to understand something," Josephine finally said, forcing herself to speak. "I am not trying to trick you. When Margaret died, I had nothing. Our parents passed years ago, and we had been living in a boarding house, working in a textile factory. Margaret had been corresponding with you for 6 months, and she was so happy, so full of hope. After she died, I found myself with a choice: stay in New York and likely end up in far worse circumstances, or come here and be honest with you about who I am. Lucas kept his eyes on the road ahead. "What did Margaret tell you about me? That you were honorable. That you wanted a partnership, not just a housekeeper. That you had a dream of building something lasting in this valley." Josephine paused. "She said you were lonely." A muscle worked in Lucas's jaw. "All true enough. I came out here 5 years ago with money I had saved working cattle drives. Bought land nobody else wanted because it is harsh country. But there is water if you know where to look, and the cattle that can survive here are tough as nails. I have built something, but it is a lonely life. A man needs more than just cattle and land. And a woman needs more than just factory work and poverty," Josephine said quietly. "But I want you to know I do not expect you to marry me just because you had an arrangement with Margaret. I can work. I am strong and I learn quickly. If you would let me stay and work for my keep until I can figure out what to do next, I would be grateful." Lucas was quiet for so long she thought perhaps she had offended him. Finally, he said, "Did you read Margaret's letters to me?" "No," Josephine said quickly. "They were private. She wrote to me about you in several of them. Said you were braver than you knew. Said you had a head for numbers and could manage household accounts better than anyone she knew. Said you sang while you worked and that you made the best apple pie in New York." He glanced at her then, and for the first time she saw a hint of a smile. "Said you deserved better than what life had given you." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes again. She was too kind, maybe, or maybe she saw clearly. Lucas turned back to the road. "Here is what I propose. You stay at the ranch. There is a spare room, small but private. You take your time settling in, learning the place. We get to know each other as people, not just names in letters. And then, if it feels right to both of us, we marry. If it does not, I will help you establish yourself however you want, whether that is in Skidoo or elsewhere." "Fair." Relief flooded through Josephine so powerfully she felt dizzy. "More than fair. Thank you, Lucas. One thing, though," he added, and his tone had turned serious. "This country is not easy. The summer heat can kill you. There are rattlesnakes, scorpions, and sometimes rougher elements passing through. You will need to learn to handle a gun, to ride, to understand the land. Are you willing to do that?" Josephine thought of the suffocating factory, the grimy boarding house, the feeling of slow death in New York's tenements. "I am willing to learn whatever is necessary." "Good," Lucas said, and this time he did smile, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his face. "Then we will make this work." The ranch appeared gradually as they rounded a bend in the road. It sat in a small valley with rocky outcroppings on 3 sides, and a stunning view of the salt flats in the distance. A creek ran nearby, lined with willows and cottonwoods that provided blessed shade. The house itself was adobe, single-story but well-built, with a covered porch and real glass windows. There was a barn, several corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing. "It is beautiful," Josephine breathed and meant it. Lucas looked pleased. "I know it is not much compared to city life." "City life is cramped and gray and smells like sewage," Josephine said bluntly. "This is open and clean and magnificent." As he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Josephine felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Lucas broke the gaze first, clearing his throat. "Let me show you inside." The house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and solid furniture. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen with a real iron stove, and 2 bedrooms. Lucas showed her to the smaller room, which had a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a window looking out toward the mountains. "I will bring your trunk in," he said. "Get settled. When you are ready, come to the kitchen and I will make us some supper." "You cook?" Josephine asked, surprised. "Well enough not to starve," Lucas said with a grin. Though I will admit, if you can actually make pie as good as Margaret claimed, you will be my hero." After he left, Josephine sat on the bed and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness, though she still ached for Margaret, but from relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming strangeness of her new situation. She clutched Margaret's shawl to her chest, the soft wool still holding a faint scent of lavender. "I made it," she whispered to her sister's memory. "I am here and I am safe, and he seems kind. I hope that is what you would have wanted." When her tears subsided, she washed her face in the basin on the dresser, changed from her traveling dress into something simpler, and wrapped Margaret's shawl around her shoulders even though the house was warm. It made her feel like her sister was with her somehow. In the kitchen, she found Lucas frying bacon and stirring a pot of beans. He looked up as she entered, his gaze catching on the shawl. "That is beautiful work," he said. "Margaret made it?" "Yes. She was talented with her hands, made this the winter before last." Josephine ran her fingers over the intricate pattern. "It is all I have of her now." Lucas set down his spoon and crossed to a chest in the corner of the main room. He opened it and pulled out a thick wool blanket, beautifully woven in shades of brown and gold. "My mother made this before she passed. I understand wanting to keep something close." They looked at each other across the room, two people bound by loss and hope in equal measure. "Here," Lucas said, approaching her. "The evenings get cold even in summer. The shawl is lovely, but you will need more." He draped the blanket over her shoulders, over Margaret's shawl, and the weight of it was comforting. His hands rested briefly on her shoulders, a gesture both comforting and thrilling. "Thank you," Josephine said softly, looking up at him. "We will take care of each other," Lucas said. "That is what partners do." They ate supper at the small kitchen table, and Lucas told her about the ranch. He ran a small herd of cattle, sold beef to the mining camps, and kept chickens and a few pigs. He had a horse he had trained himself, a mare named Copper who was gentle enough for Josephine to learn on. His closest neighbor was 5 miles away, a prospector named Henry who mostly kept to himself. "It is isolated," Lucas admitted. "Sometimes I go weeks without seeing another soul except when I take cattle to sell. But it is mine. Nobody tells me what to do or when to do it. That freedom is worth the loneliness." "Was worth," Josephine corrected gently. "You are not alone anymore." His smile was slow and genuine. "No. I suppose I am not." That night, lying in her new bed with Margaret's shawl and Lucas's mother's blanket wrapped around her, Josephine listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert. Coyotes called in the distance, a sound that would have terrified her a day ago, but now seemed simply part of this strange new world. Through the wall, she could hear Lucas moving around his room, the creak of his bed as he settled in. She thought about his hands on her shoulders, the warmth of his smile, the way he had spoken of partnership and freedom. She had come west expecting to fulfill her sister's promise, but now she wondered if perhaps she had found something for herself instead. The next morning, Josephine woke to the sound of roosters and emerged from her room to find Lucas already gone. There was fresh coffee on the stove, still warm, and a note in strong, clear handwriting. "Out checking water lines. Back by noon. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen." She spent the morning exploring the house properly, taking stock of supplies and getting a feel for the place. The pantry was reasonably stocked with basics: flour, beans, coffee, sugar, dried beef. There were eggs from the chickens, fresh milk in the cool box, and a side of bacon. She found Margaret's letters to Lucas, tied with string and tucked into a drawer, but she did not read them. They were not hers to read. Instead, she set about making herself useful. She scrubbed the kitchen, organized the pantry, and started a batch of bread. By the time Lucas returned, dusty and sweating, the house smelled of yeast and fresh baked bread. He stopped in the doorway, inhaling deeply. "That smells like heaven." "Just bread," Josephine said, wiping her hands on the apron she had found. "But there will be butter and jam with it when it cools." Lucas crossed to the wash basin, stripping off his shirt unselfconsciously to wash the dust away. Josephine tried not to stare at the strong lines of his back and shoulders, the play of muscle under sun-bronzed skin. She busied herself slicing the bread that was cool enough to handle. "I was thinking," Lucas said, pulling on a clean shirt, "that this afternoon I could teach you to ride. Just the basics. Copper is patient, and the sooner you can ride, the sooner you can really see the valley." "I would like that," Josephine said. After a lunch of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, Lucas led her out to the barn. Copper was a beautiful sorrel mare with a calm disposition and intelligent eyes. Lucas showed Josephine how to approach the horse, how to let Copper smell her, how to stroke her neck and speak softly. "Horses sense fear," Lucas explained, standing close behind Josephine as she petted Copper. "But they also sense kindness. Be calm and confident, even if you do not feel it, and she will trust you." His presence behind her was warm and solid, and Josephine found herself hyper-aware of how close he stood, how his voice rumbled when he spoke softly, how his hands came up to guide hers along Copper's neck. "Like this," he murmured, and she felt his breath against her hair. He taught her to saddle the horse, explaining each strap and buckle with patient detail. Then he lifted her into the saddle with ease, his hands firm at her waist, and showed her how to hold the reins, how to sit, how to use her legs for guidance. "I will lead her," Lucas said, taking the lead rope. "Just get used to the feeling." They walked around the corral for an hour, Lucas offering gentle corrections and encouragement. Josephine found herself relaxing into the rhythm, enjoying the height and the gentle sway. When Lucas finally helped her down, his hands again at her waist, she was smiling. "That was wonderful," she said, breathless with exhilaration. "You are a natural," Lucas said, and his hands remained at her waist perhaps longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Another few lessons and you will be riding on your own." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Lucas would rise before dawn to tend the animals and check the ranch. Josephine would make breakfast, then spend her mornings managing the house and learning the skills she would need. Lucas taught her to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn and showing her how to hold the rifle, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. "You might need to scare off a coyote or worse, a man with bad intentions," he said seriously. "I need to know you can protect yourself when I am not here." She learned to recognize the poisonous plants and creatures, how to shake out her boots for scorpions, how to watch for rattlesnakes. Lucas showed her which desert plants were useful, which could provide water, which had medicinal properties, which the cattle would eat when forage was scarce. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Lucas told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the death of his parents in a flash flood when he was 19. He spoke of coming west alone, determined to build something of his own. Josephine told him about New York, about the cramped apartment she had shared with Margaret, about the endless gray days in the factory. She spoke of her parents, lost to typhoid when she was 16, and how Margaret had kept them afloat through sheer determination. "She would have loved it here," Josephine said one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "She always wanted open spaces and clean air." "You honor her memory by being here," Lucas said quietly, "by living the life she wanted to live." 3 weeks after her arrival, Lucas announced at breakfast that he needed to make a trip to Skidoo to sell some cattle and pick up supplies. "It will take 2 days. I would take you with me, but the drive is hard and Skidoo is rough." I would rather you stayed here where it is safe." Josephine felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being alone, but she squared her shoulders. "I will be fine. You have taught me well." Lucas looked at her seriously. "Keep the rifle loaded and near. Lock the doors at night. If anyone comes by that you do not know, do not let them in. Henry might stop by to check on you, that is all right. He is a good man." "I will be careful," Josephine promised. Lucas seemed reluctant to leave, lingering over his coffee, checking and rechecking his supplies. Finally, as he stood in the doorway ready to go, he turned back. "Josephine," he said, and something in his tone made her heart skip. "I want you to know that these past weeks have been the best I have had in years. You have made this house feel like a home." She felt color rise in her cheeks. "You have given me a chance at a new life. I am grateful." "It is more than that," Lucas said, stepping closer. "At least it is becoming more than that, for me." Her breath caught. "For me too." They stood looking at each other, the air thick with unspoken feelings. Then Lucas reached up and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "When I get back," he said softly, "we should talk about the future, about making this permanent." "Yes," Josephine whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Stay safe." Then he was gone, riding off with the cattle, and Josephine was left standing in the doorway with her heart pounding and her mind reeling. The first day alone passed uneventfully. Josephine kept busy with chores, baked pies using dried apples, and worked on mending some of Lucas's shirts. As evening fell, she made sure all the doors and windows were locked, loaded the rifle as Lucas had taught her, and settled in with a book he had left her. The second day started the same, but in the afternoon she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Josephine grabbed the rifle and went to the window, peering out cautiously. An older man with a grizzled beard and worn mining clothes was dismounting, and she recognized him from Lucas's description as Henry, the neighbor. She set the rifle aside but kept it close as she opened the door. "Miss Vance," the man called. "I am Henry Peterson. Lucas asked me to check on you while he was away." "Hello, Mr. Peterson," Josephine said, remaining on the porch. "I am well, thank you." Henry nodded approvingly. "Good to see you are cautious. Lucas said you were smart. I just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. This country can be harsh for folks not used to it. I am managing fine, but I appreciate the kindness." They chatted briefly, Henry offering to help with anything heavy if she needed it, and then he rode off. Josephine felt reassured by the encounter, grateful that Lucas had people looking out for his interests. That evening, as she sat on the porch wrapped in both Margaret's shawl and Lucas's mother's blanket, watching the stars emerge in impossible numbers across the black sky, Josephine allowed herself to think seriously about the future. She was falling in love with Lucas Grant. It was that simple and that complicated. He was kind and strong, patient and passionate about his dreams. He treated her as an equal, teaching her rather than dictating, listening to her thoughts and opinions. And she felt, or at least hoped, that he was falling for her too. The way he looked at her, the excuses he found to touch her hand or stand close, the reluctance with which he had left it all pointed to a man whose feelings were deepening. When Margaret had first arranged this marriage, Josephine had thought she would be fulfilling a duty, making a practical arrangement. Now she realized she wanted so much more. She wanted a true partnership, a real marriage, built on respect and affection and maybe even love. Lucas returned late the next afternoon, and the smile that broke across his face when he saw her waiting on the porch made Josephine's heart soar. "I missed you," he said simply, dismounting and striding toward her. "I missed you too," she admitted. He was dusty and tired, but he pulled her into an embrace anyway, and Josephine wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid strength of him, breathing in the scent of leather and horse and something uniquely Lucas. "Did everything go well?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "Got a good price for the cattle and managed to get some supplies we needed," he grinned, "including some things for you." "For me?" Lucas pulled a package from his saddlebag and handed it to her. Inside was fabric, a lovely deep blue cotton and ribbon, and a small jar of fancy hand cream. "You needed some things of your own," Lucas said, looking almost shy. "The storekeeper's wife helped me pick out the fabric, said it would match your eyes." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. "Lucas, this is too much." "No," he said firmly, "it is not enough. I want to give you everything, Josephine. I want to make you happy here." "I am happy," she said. "Happier than I have been in years." They stood close together in the fading light, and Lucas reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have been thinking the whole ride back about what to say, how to say this right. I am not good with fancy words, so I will just be plain. I want to marry you, Josephine, not because of any arrangement with Margaret, but because I am falling in love with you. These weeks with you have shown me what a real partnership could be, what it means to have someone to share this life with. But I need to know if you feel even a fraction of what I feel." Josephine felt tears spill over, but they were happy tears. "I feel it all, Lucas. I came here terrified and grieving, and you have given me not just a home but hope. You have treated me with kindness and respect, and you have made me feel valued in a way I never have before. I am falling in love with you too." Lucas let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her close again. This time when he kissed her, it was not on the forehead but properly, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as Josephine responded, her hands coming up to grip his vest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me? For real this time, as Josephine, not as Margaret's replacement but as yourself?" "Yes," Josephine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later by a circuit preacher who came through Skidoo once a month. Josephine wore the blue fabric Lucas had bought her, which she had stayed up late sewing into a simple but lovely dress. She wrapped Margaret's shawl around her shoulders, feeling her sister's presence in the soft wool, imagining Margaret smiling down at her happiness. Lucas wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Josephine felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the small church in Skidoo. Henry was there as a witness along with the storekeeper and his wife, who had been kind to Josephine on her first day. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Lucas said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, promising to cherish and protect her, to build a life with her as equal partners. Josephine's vows were equally earnest, promising to stand beside him through whatever challenges this harsh land might bring. When the preacher pronounced them married, Lucas kissed her thoroughly enough to make Henry cough and the storekeeper's wife giggle. Josephine did not care. She was married to a good man, in a place of stark beauty, with a future that felt full of possibility. They returned to the ranch that evening, and Lucas carried her over the threshold of what was now truly their home. In the bedroom that had been his and was now theirs, he unwrapped her slowly, reverent fingers removing the shawl, unbuttoning the blue dress, until she stood before him in only her chemise. "You are beautiful," he said, voice rough with emotion. "So are you," Josephine whispered, reaching up to help him remove his vest and shirt. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the feelings that had been building for weeks. Lucas was gentle but intense, making sure of her comfort even as he showed her pleasures she had never imagined. Josephine gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and afterward they lay tangled together under the blankets, her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Lucas said into the darkness. "I know it has only been a short time, but I do." "I love you too," Josephine said. "Margaret's letters brought me here, but what we have built is ours." The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and deepening love. Lucas taught Josephine to ride well enough that she could accompany him on short trips around the ranch. She learned to help with calving, to mend fences, to read the signs of coming storms in the desert sky. In return, Josephine brought organization and comfort to their home. She kept careful accounts of expenses and income, planned meals to stretch their supplies, and created a garden in the small, irrigated area near the house where she grew vegetables and herbs. They worked side by side during the days and fell into each other's arms at night, their physical relationship growing more confident and passionate as they learned what brought each other pleasure. Josephine had never imagined marriage could be like this, a partnership of equals who truly enjoyed each other's company both in and out of bed. Winter came to the valley, and while it was milder than the brutal New York winters Josephine had known, it brought its own challenges. There were nights when temperatures dropped below freezing, days when the wind howled through the valley with terrifying force. Josephine would wrap herself in Margaret's shawl and Lucas's mother's blanket, and Lucas would build up the fire and hold her close. "Tell me about Margaret," he said one such evening as they sat before the fire. "Not as my potential wife, but as your sister. I want to know her through your eyes." Josephine smiled, her head resting on his shoulder. "She was bossy," she said fondly, "always telling me what to do, how to do it better. But she was also fiercely protective. When our parents died, she was only 20 and she took charge of everything. Made sure we had a place to live, found us work, kept us fed. She sacrificed so much for me." "She sounds remarkable," Lucas said. "She was, and I think she would be happy for us. This was what she wanted, a good life with a good man. I think she would be glad that I found it, even if she could not." "I hope so," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "I like to think both our mothers and your sister are somewhere approving of what we have built." "I am sure they are," Josephine said. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. A severe storm damaged part of the barn roof, and Lucas and Josephine spent days repairing it together. She learned to climb ladders without fear, to hammer nails straight, to measure and cut boards. Her hands, once soft from factory work, became calloused and capable. In April, Josephine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Lucas over breakfast. He dropped his fork, staring at her. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor," Josephine said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Lucas let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "We are having a baby." "Josephine, we are having a baby." Their joy was tempered with practical concerns. The nearest doctor was in Skidoo, a hard 2-hour ride. Lucas immediately began making plans, arranging with Henry to check on Josephine more frequently when he had to be away, stocking extra supplies, even building a cradle in the evenings. Josephine bloomed with pregnancy. She felt healthier and stronger than she ever had, attributing it to the clean air and good food and happiness. Her belly swelled gently through the summer months, and Lucas would place his hands on it each night, marveling at the life growing inside her. Boy or girl? He would ask, though he always followed it with, "I do not care which, as long as you are both healthy." "I think a boy," Josephine would say, strong and stubborn like his father. In late October, as the desert began to cool again, Josephine's pains began. Lucas had already arranged for the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Anderson, who had experience with birthing, to come stay with them when the time came. Henry rode hard to Skidoo to fetch her while Lucas stayed with Josephine, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her face with cool water. "You are doing wonderfully," he kept saying, though his face was pale with worry. Mrs. Anderson arrived and took charge with brisk efficiency. She shooed Lucas out of the bedroom, but he refused to go far, pacing in the main room like a caged animal. The sounds of Josephine's labor pains nearly drove him mad with helplessness. Finally, after hours that felt like days, there was a new sound. The sharp, indignant cry of a newborn baby. Lucas burst through the door to find Mrs. Anderson cleaning a squalling infant while Josephine lay back against the pillows, exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," Mrs. Anderson announced. "Healthy lungs on him." Lucas crossed to the bed and took his son carefully, tears streaming down his face. The baby was red and wrinkled and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He looked at Josephine with such love and wonder that she felt her own tears spill over. "We made this," he said in awe. "Look what we made together." "What shall we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Lucas said, "Matthew, after my father, Matthew Grant." "Matthew," Josephine repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect." Lucas carefully placed the baby in Josephine's arms and sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their son. Little Matthew had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling. "Thank you," Lucas said softly to his wife. "Thank you for coming into my life, for taking a chance on this rough country and a lonely cowboy. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for seeing me, not just as Margaret's replacement, but as myself," Josephine replied. "Thank you for building this life with me." They sat together, the three of them, as the desert sunset painted the room in shades of gold and rose. Mrs. Anderson bustled around cleaning up, then left them alone, and they remained there, wrapped in the warmth of their love and the wonder of new life. The months that followed were exhausting and exhilarating. Matthew was a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Josephine, despite her fatigue, felt a fierce joy she had never known. Lucas was a devoted father, taking on extra household chores so Josephine could rest, walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, looking at his son with such tender amazement that it made Josephine fall even more deeply in love with him. When Matthew was 3 months old on a mild winter day, Josephine took him outside wrapped in blankets. She had brought Margaret's shawl with her, and now she wrapped it around both herself and the baby. "This was your Aunt Margaret's," she told Matthew softly. "She made it with her own hands, and she would have loved you so much. She is why we are here, why your papa and I found each other." Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them, enveloping them in his strength and warmth. "She gave us all a gift," he said. "She brought us together." They stood there, a family of 3, looking out over the harsh, beautiful land that had become their home. The desert valley stretched before them, endless and full of possibility, just like their future. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Matthew grew into a sturdy, adventurous toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's quick smile. When he was 2, Josephine became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, with golden hair and serious gray eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, and finally, when Josephine was 31, a third son they named James. The house Lucas had built for one lonely cowboy now rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Through it all, Lucas and Josephine's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course. The ranch faced hard times when drought killed half their herd one summer. They argued about whether to try to expand or consolidate, whether to send Matthew to school in Skidoo or teach him at home. But they always came back to respect and affection, always remembered that they were partners. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas gave Josephine a beautiful hand-tooled leather journal. "For writing down our story," he said, "so the children will know how we came to be." "What will I say?" Josephine asked, running her fingers over the leather. "Tell them that their mother was brave enough to come across the country to marry a stranger, that she took a chance on a hard life in a harsh land, that she brought warmth and wonder to a lonely cowboy's world." Lucas smiled. "And that every day since, I have thanked God that she came." Josephine opened the journal, and on the first page, in careful script, she wrote, "I came to California in 1908, expecting to fulfill my sister's promise but finding my own happiness instead. I brought Margaret's shawl for warmth, and Lucas Grant wrapped me in wonder." As the children grew, Josephine told them stories of their Aunt Margaret, the woman they had never met but whose courage and planning had brought their parents together. She told them about New York, about the hard times before coming west, about the leap of faith it took to board that train with nothing but a single trunk and her sister's shawl. She also told them about their father, about how he had treated her with kindness from the first moment, how he had built something lasting through determination and hard work. She wanted them to understand that love was not just feeling but action, not just passion but partnership. Lucas taught the children the skills of ranch life. Matthew, as the eldest, took to it naturally, learning to ride and rope and read the desert like a book. Sarah surprised them all with a gift for working with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse. Thomas had a head for numbers and helped his mother with the ranch accounts. And little James, well, James loved everything and everyone with an enthusiasm that kept them all laughing. When Josephine was 35 and Lucas 40, they made a trip back to New York with the children. It was Matthew's first time on a train, and his excitement reminded Josephine of her own journey west 17 years earlier. But this time, she was not traveling alone and afraid. She had Lucas beside her, their 4 children with them, returning not as a desperate factory worker but as a successful rancher's wife. They visited Margaret's grave, and Josephine laid flowers and whispered thanks to her sister. "You gave me this," she said softly, with Lucas's hand in hers. "You gave me everything." Back at the ranch, life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew and eventually began to leave. Matthew married a girl from Skidoo and started his own ranch nearby. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, became a teacher and moved to Los Angeles. Thomas took over much of the day-to-day ranch management, having a knack for the business side. And James, true to his nature, spent several years roaming before finally settling back on the home ranch with a bride of his own. Through it all, Lucas and Josephine remained each other's center. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more comfortable, but no less real. When Josephine was 52, she found the blue fabric dress she had worn to their wedding, carefully packed away. She held it up, marveling at how small it seemed now, how young she had been. She was folding it back when Lucas came in. "I remember that dress," he said with a smile. "I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Josephine admitted. "So afraid you would change your mind that I was not what you wanted." Lucas pulled her into his arms, both of them moving a bit more slowly now but fitting together as perfectly as ever. "You were exactly what I wanted, even if I did not know it until I met you. You turned this place into a home. You gave me a family. You gave my life meaning beyond just surviving." "We gave each other that," Josephine corrected. "I was dying slowly in New York. You gave me life, Lucas." Real life. That evening they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night. Josephine had Margaret's shawl, faded now but still beautiful, and Lucas had his mother's blanket. They had both been wrapped in these pieces of their past, and together they had built a future. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked quietly. "Coming west, living this hard life?" "Never," Josephine said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Everything I value, everything I am, came from that choice. How could I regret it? I am glad," Lucas said, pulling her closer. "Because I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you. Empty, I think. Just going through motions without purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the coyotes beginning their nightly song. The desert that had once seemed so alien to Josephine now felt like home, as familiar and beloved as Lucas himself. More years passed. They became grandparents multiple times over, their house once again filling with young voices during visits. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, then their 30th. Lucas's hair turned silver, and Josephine's face showed the lines of a life well lived in the sun and wind. On their 35th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed the entire valley. As the sun set, Lucas stood and called for quiet. "I want to tell you all a story," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. 35 years ago, a young woman got off a train in Skidoo with nothing but a trunk and her sister's shawl. She had come to marry me, even though we had never met, because her sister, who was supposed to come, had died. She was brave and honest and gave me a choice about whether to honor the arrangement. He looked at Josephine, his eyes warm with love. I did not know it then, but she was giving me the greatest gift of my life. Not just herself, but a partnership, a family, a reason to build something lasting. She took this rough cowboy and this harsh land and made it all into something beautiful. Josephine felt tears on her cheeks as Lucas continued. "So I want to thank her, publicly, for 35 years of love and laughter, hard work and harder times, joy and sorrow shared equally. Thank you, Josephine, for wrapping my life in warmth and wonder." Their children and grandchildren applauded, and Josephine rose to stand beside Lucas. "I should thank you," she said, "for seeing me as myself, for treating me as an equal, for building this life with me. Margaret's letters brought me here, but you made me want to stay. You gave me a home, not just a house. You gave me a family, not just children. You gave me love, and that has made all the difference." They kissed to more applause and laughter, surrounded by the family they had built together. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Lucas and Josephine walked out to the spot where they had first stood together looking at the ranch 35 years earlier. The land had changed, more buildings now, better irrigation, larger herds. But the essential character remained the same, harsh and beautiful and free. "I hope I have a few more years with you," Lucas said quietly. "But if I do not, I want you to know that you made my life complete, everything I dreamed of and more." "Do not talk like that," Josephine said, though she understood. They were both in their 60s now, and the desert was still harsh. "We have years yet. I'm not done with you, Lucas Grant." He laughed and pulled her close. "Good, because I am not done with you either." They stood there wrapped together, the desert night cool around them, the stars brilliant overhead. Josephine thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that train with nothing but hope and her sister's shawl. She thought about Lucas, the lonely cowboy who had taken a chance on a stranger. She thought about all the years between, the love they had built, the family they had raised, the life they had created in this unlikely place. "I would do it all again," she whispered. "Every moment exactly the same." "So would I," Lucas said. "So would I." In fact, they had many more years together. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to marry and have children of their own. The ranch that Lucas had started alone and that he and Josephine had built together became a legacy, passed down through generations. When Lucas finally passed at the age of 73, with Josephine holding his hand, his last words were, "Thank you for coming to me. Thank you for staying." Josephine mourned him deeply, but not hopelessly. She had their children and grandchildren around her, proof of their love made manifest. She had the ranch they had built together. And she had her memories, decades of warmth and wonder and partnership. She lived another 8 years, staying on the ranch with Thomas and his family, still sharp and engaged until the end. She spent her last years writing in the journal Lucas had given her, recording not just their story but the stories of their children and grandchildren, creating a record of the family that had sprung from one brave decision and one kind cowboy. On the day before she died at the age of 81, she called her children to her bedside. "I want to be buried next to your father," she said. "And I want Margaret's shawl and his mother's blanket buried with us, one each. Those pieces of our past should rest with us." "Of course, Mama," they said, though Sarah added, "Are you sure? They are family heirlooms." "You are our family heirlooms," Josephine said with a smile. "You and your children and theirs. The shawl and blanket served their purpose. They kept us warm when we needed it, and they reminded us of where we came from. But the real legacy is you, all of you, and the love that created you." That night, Josephine passed peacefully in her sleep, and her children honored her wishes. At her funeral, Matthew told the story his mother had told him many times, about a mail-order bride who came with her sister's shawl, and the cowboy who wrapped her in warmth and wonder. "They built something lasting," he said, looking at the crowd of family gathered. "Not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy of love and hard work and partnership. That is what they gave us, and that is what we pass on." Years later, when the old adobe house was finally replaced with something more modern, they found Josephine's journal tucked away in a drawer. The last entry read, "I came west as Josephine Vance, frightened and grieving, carrying my sister's shawl and her promise. I became Josephine Grant, wife and mother, rancher and partner. Lucas wrapped me in warmth and wonder from the first day, and I wrapped him in love and loyalty in return. We built a life together that exceeded anything either of us could have dreamed alone. To my children, grandchildren, and all who come after, remember that love is a choice made daily, that partnership requires respect and effort, and that the greatest adventures often begin with a single brave decision." I stepped off a train in Skidoo in 1908 with nothing but hope, and I lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. May you all be so blessed. The journal became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations, a testament to a mail-order bride who took a chance, and a cowboy who offered not just shelter but true partnership, wrapping her life in warmth and wonder that lasted until their final days and beyond, living on in the family they created together.